coming up next on The Health Hustle.
Know what your mission is. Know what value you're trying to provide. And then keep it simple. The more simple that it is, the higher your chance of success is going to be. Anytime you start to add complexity or you try to deviate from what your mission is, odds are that it's not going to go the way that you think it was going to go. My last tour in the SEAL teams, I was the officer in charge of all wartime training for the West Coast SEAL team. So it was my job to prepare every single SEAL on the West Coast, which is like 1,200 SEALs, for war. And I would get platoons. They would come through training, and I'd put them through 6 months of focused training. The number one mistake that I would see platoons make is they would not keep things simple. They would try to make things too complex, and nothing survives first contact with the enemy. And with business, there's things that are going to go wrong, and the more simple your business model is to begin with, the more likelihood that you're going to be able to weather those storms when they come. So for us, what we wanted to start with was put the best beef we possibly can in the box and give it to our customers. Don't have a lot of optionality. Just make 7 or 8 different boxes and send it. And keep all the focus on just the customer experience and the beef. Now we're to a point to where we know that we can do that well. Now we're expanding and making things a little bit more complex, but not that much more complex. Give people the ability to add a la carte items, to build their own box, add beef jerky and beef sticks as an option, maybe some swag. But to begin with, the sole focus was best beef you can in a box, best customer service. If we just did those 2 things, we were very confident we were going to be successful.
What up, y'all? Corey here. In this episode, I had a chance to sit down with Navy SEAL Sean Glass. He actually flew in from Virginia just to join me in the show, and man, am I glad that he did, because we had an amazing conversation. Just a quick intro on Sean. He grew up near Corsicana, Texas, graduated from Texas A&M, then joined the SEAL teams at 25. He's had multiple combat deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Eastern Africa. He's an officer in charge of wartime training for West Coast SEAL teams, father of 5, and lives on a small farm in Virginia. Some of the things that we get into specifically, though, are the unique use of social media that he used in SEAL teams versus how he uses it now, what it was like growing up in Texas, specifically on a farm, why he believes that goats are convicts. I found that conversation hilarious. Why he has this proclivity to seek adventure, and why he even decided to join the SEAL teams in the first place. All things beef related, what some of his earlier jobs were, why he started a beef company in the first place, how to plan for the long term in your business, why he finishes his cattle with fruit, that's an interesting conversation, a masterclass on leadership, which obviously he knows a lot about, especially with the SEALs, some of the deeper lessons that he's learned from influencer marketing, why he believes that relationships equal mission success, a rapid fire question round, and so much more. One last thing, if you're a health or fitness professional and you're having difficulties getting leads, one of the most common reasons that I see this is not having a well-defined niche. If you go to the link in the description, I have a free 3-step process that walks you through exactly how to get clarity on which niche is best suited for you and your business. Without further ado, let's go. Sean Glass, welcome to the show. How you doing, brother?
Doing well, man. Thanks for having me.
When we first connected, this is kind of where I want to start with this.
Okay.
Is that you said something to me that still blows my mind, and it's why I'm most excited for this conversation, is that I always do quite a bit of research on my guests before I bring them on, just so that I can have a fruitful conversation. And I admittedly had difficulties finding things on you. And it was based on a conversation that we had in terms of how you used to use social media, which I found hilarious. Is that as somebody who used to be a Navy SEAL, or is technically still a Navy SEAL, you use social media a little bit different than the average human.
Very different than most people. And it gave me some habits of not ever wanting to associate whatsoever with social media. But we would basically target people off of their social media. So bad guys, as crazy as it sounds, they like Twitter. They have all the same Facebook, Instagram accounts that everybody else has. And that's how we would start to find people, was through some of their little social media posts. And my last deployment was against the Islamic State in 2015-16 in Iraq. And they were prolific on social media. Like, that's how they recruited. That's how they did all these things. And it's crazy to me that they weren't booted off. Like, ISIS had a legit Twitter account somehow that they were running, but we we used it to our advantage.
So how do you feel about it now that you're obviously consistently more posting on there because of your business?
I'm still not good at it. I'm
Okay.
still trying to figure out how to be good at it and how to connect with people. But I just have this natural aversion towards, one, knowing what it's capable of doing, two, knowing what it does to our brains too, and then three, just really enjoying my private life as well and not necessarily wanting to put myself out there too much. But you have to, because the business is all about connecting with people and showing them what we have. But I'm still very much an amateur at it.
Well, you've admittedly gotten better, because I did go back
good.
to the original posts on the Primal Beef site, and based on what you're doing now, you're better. You seem a little bit more comfortable.
Good.
Obviously, there's a learning curve to this type of thing, but
Yeah.
Do you still get uncomfortable posting on it based on your history with it?
I do. And I don't know that it's ever going to go away. And part of it is probably the history with it. And part of it is probably, too, I just very much enjoy my privacy. So the feeling of putting myself out there is just not a very comfortable feeling for me whatsoever. But it's just the price of doing business these days. Is that's how you connect with people. That's how you get people to understand the value that you bring to the table, is through that social media. And for us, our two big things that we care about are putting the best beef that we possibly can in a box, and then providing value to the customer. So I have to be able to connect with them. So good to hear that I'm doing better. You didn't say I was doing good, just better. So hopefully somewhere along the way, I'll get good at it. Maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, I'll be pretty solid at it. Or I'll just pay someone to run it for me, hopefully, by then.
It's like anything, man. There's a learning curve, but yeah, you're definitely improving. There's no question. It's weird because I am obnoxiously open and honest and transparent about my life on social media. So then ever since having that conversation, I'm always like, not that I don't have anything anybody wants, let's be honest, but it was like an eye-opening conversation for me. I was like, oh, I view the world very different than some people do.
Yeah, it's probably a good thing that you view the world differently than some people. I don't know how healthy it is to view the world through my lens.
Yeah.
But it is definitely a powerful tool,
Yeah.
and it can be used for lots of good things. One of my biggest fears is that I just become addicted to it, and I just spend all my time scrolling on there instead of enjoying life. So I try to do what I can, post, keep people informed, and then keep it a little bit at an arm distance, but still engage with people that ask questions and whatnot as well. So
Yeah, I think the best thing I've realized too is that I use it as a means to produce, not to consume. So for me, it's putting out helpful information that's useful to others, but I try to spend as little time as humanly possible consuming the actual content on there, to be honest.
that's a good way to look at it. It still takes me a dramatic amount of time to actually get a post up too.
Oh, yeah.
It blows my mind.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've planned operations that took less time than it does for me to analyze this post that I'm about to send out into the interwebs.
There's so much truth to that statement. People drastically underestimate how much work goes into creating content.
Yeah.
Most people see it as this fun side thing that you just do and you throw up a video without realizing that when they actually try to do even something as basic as a podcast show is they're like, whoa, there's way more to this content creation thing, quote unquote, than most people realize.
Yeah, I had a buddy of mine that is one of the employees for my day job, Echelon Front, fly out, and we did a big content shoot, did some stuff at my farm, took him to the farm where all the cattle are raised, gave me a whole bunch of photos and videos I could use, and I think I burned through them in a week. Maybe a week.
Yep. Yeah, that's so much truth to that. So I do want to rewind a little bit. So kind of where I feel like I want to go with this conversation is just to give people an overarching picture of you is grew up in Texas, eventually found yourself on the SEAL team, and now you started a beef company.
Correct.
So there's a lot of twists and turns in that journey, which I'm excited to get into. But really where I want to start, just because of the relevance of Texas, is you grew up in a small town, middle of nowhere, Texas, on your own farm/ranch. Is that correct?
I did. So I tell people Corsicana because that's the nearest town that people would probably know if they're from Texas. But I grew up in a town called Blooming Grove, but we weren't even really in Blooming Grove. I think Blooming Grove's population was 1,200 people, but we were kind of in between those two places. So we had about 55 acres, various animals on there. We had sheep at one point in time, goats, freaking emus at one point in time. But the thing that my parents really raised were horses growing up. So what I if you would ask, like, what kind of farm did we have, what kind of ranch did we have, it would be horses for the most part.
Is there a lot of money in horses?
None whatsoever.
Really?
I think there probably was at one point in time, and my parents were raising Arabians, which in the 80s when I was growing up was kind of the big money horse. There was lots of oil money floating around, and these sheiks would pay, no jokes, in 80s money, $1 million for a stud horse, basically. So we had a lot of different Arabians, but when the oil crisis hit in the late 80s, basically the bottom fell out of the entire market, and there really just wasn't a whole lot of money in horses. So it was never my parents' primary source of income. My dad was a businessman. Him and my uncle had their own company. My mom was a teacher where we went to school to spend time with us. So we had income, and that was kind of probably a hobby that they were hoping would one day start to bring in more money than it did, but it just kind of fell apart.
I would have to guess that I don't know anything about horses, but would it be more like race horses that would have the money?
They would maybe race horses. I mean, quarter horses in Texas is a big deal. Arabians are like show horses. They're really endurance horses. They used to use them for these crazy distance races, but they're very finicky. They're very high maintenance horses. Like a quarter horse, it's pretty easy. But if I feel like Arabians are beautiful and they know they're beautiful, if that makes sense. So there was probably a good market for it in the 80s, but it just kind of, the bubble popped, like it did with a lot of different things in the 80s when the market just kind of took a tumble.
So what did you learn, good and bad, from your father in terms of business and entrepreneurship? Because it sounds like he's had a few adventures in that realm.
Yeah. I mean, just don't quit would probably be the number one thing. And he's had, lots of failures and then some successes too. But it never seemed to slow him down whenever he would have a fact. We never really felt it if something didn't work out. So the thing that's kind of been a constant for him and my uncle all throughout their adult lives has been real estate. So they started a couple different businesses. Some did better than others. Some are still around, but then they really started to focus on real estate, and now they have a pretty good little real estate company going on in and around Corsicana.
Residential or commercial?
Residential mostly. Most like multifamily residential type stuff.
So they're like the known real estate people in that town?
Probably more or less. I haven't been back to Corsicana in 15 years or
Really?
something for a visit. I think I was there for a day when I was working with a company in Dallas for Echelon Front. I drove down for a day and had like a meal with my parents, but I just don't get the opportunity to go back that often. No offense to Corsicana, I love you, but if I get to spend time in Texas, it's probably not going to be in Corsicana. Is not going to be my number one choice. It'll probably be here somewhere in the hill country.
I was going to say, what is your favorite city in Texas? Obviously, Corsicana's not on the top of that list. But.
No, I like the small towns in Texas. Like, I would rather get away to some of the hill country, definitely the prettiest places in Texas, in my opinion. I used to really like Dallas because that was the big town where we grew up. But my impression of Dallas now is it's massive. It's just huge. And it's not quite the Dallas that I probably remember growing up. It has a little bit, to me at least, from an outsider's perspective now, a little bit less of a hometown Texas city feel, and it feels just like a big city. So probably outskirts somewhere. Again, theme of like not many people.
Yeah.
Outskirts, quiet, nature, that type of thing.
Yeah. I'm starting to gravitate towards that. I've spent a few years obviously living here in Austin. Part of it was downtown. And then I spent a month out on a farm / ranch, I guess you could say, taking care of a bunch of animals for this couple that left town. They had longhorns and goats and chickens and ducks and dogs and a bunch of exotic animals. And so I was out there for a month. And ever since that experience, it changed me, man.
It does.
It was like, wow, I could really, like, just waking up with the sunrise and it's quiet with the exception of the goats freaking going nuts.
All the time.
Other than that, though, like, it changed me. I was like, I could do this. Like, I could do the hobby farm thing.
Yeah.
I don't know about the ranch thing, like actually having a bunch of cattle like you guys do, but definitely something that's more low-key where I can just, like, have that routine of taking care of animals and, like, providing something for a different species, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But the ranch thing, I feel like might be a little bit more than I want.
It's very rewarding what you're describing,
Yes.
and then if your property's set up the right way. So we have like our family farm that's about 55 acres where we are now in Virginia, and then the farm where all the cattle for Primal beef are is about 20 minutes outside of where I live in a little town in Virginia. So kind of separate those two. Very big cattle operation, lots of cattle moving around. I have at any given time on my property somewhere between probably 20 and 35 Black Angus cattle. And if your property is set up right with good fencing, good pasture, and then live water, and we're very fortunate to have kind of two rivers that just kind of float around the outline of our property, It's actually very little work. During spring, summer, fall, they just move, they graze, they drink the water, they do their thing. I'll do a little bit of pasture management where I'll keep them on one pasture for a couple days, and then to alleviate pressure on that pasture, open some gates, and they just move into the next pasture. Wintertime, you're giving them about a big bale, like 1,000-pound bale of hay a day. So you fire up the tractor, drop a bale in the morning, or if you're super lazy, you just drop like 5 bales around the property, and then you're good for a week. But cattle are surprisingly little work compared to what most people think they are if the property's set up right.
That's how the longhorn were that the farm I was out on is like maybe once or twice a week it felt like I had to go out and like move some hay around.
Yeah.
Or I'd drop some pellets in their little bins out there. But other than that, like they just kind of hung out. Like they ate everything.
Yes.
But they just kind of hung out for the most part.
Yeah, they know what they're doing, and they've been doing it for, however long they've been a species, basically just mobbing, moving, and grazing and drinking. So we have on our farm, right now the Angus cattle, and then really chickens is the only other kind of farm animal. We have donkeys and some other stuff, but like legit farm animal. And the chickens are more work than the cattle are. I mean, you're in there every morning giving them feed. You're checking for eggs. You're giving them water. At nighttime, we don't have a lot of predation, so I don't close them up in the coop at nighttime. We have an electric net around them to keep them safe. But if you didn't have that, you'd have to go out at nighttime and close them in the coop. So like you're touching them multiple times a day. Whereas with the cattle, they're kind of ornamental for the vast majority of the year. And you just get to enjoy having them on the property, seeing the cycle of life, the new calves being born, which could or could not require some aid depending upon how the calving goes. But all in all, fairly easy. Now, if you ask my wife, when we first moved out there and I was traveling still a bit for work, she'd probably have some horror stories about the bull getting out and cows getting stuck in the bale feeder. So she might have a different perception on it, at least at first. But now they kind of settle into the rhythm, and there's surprisingly little work for the size animal. I mean, you're talking, let's say 30 we have on the property right now. That's probably somewhere in the vicinity of like 50,000 pounds of animal on the property, and man, they're really fairly easy.
Yeah.
Fairly easy.
Yeah, the goats didn't feel that easy, I'll be honest.
No.
There was a fair amount of work every day, morning and afternoon, where I had to deal with these goats on some level.
They're like little convicts, basically. My parents bought some goats when we were young, and then as soon as they died, they were never replaced.
Really?
So yeah, no. So sheep are a little bit different. They're a little bit easier, but goats are they're escape artists. Like I remember coming home one day and it was like on top of my dad's new Suburban he had just got, which of course means the entire paint job was jacked up. So they bought them because they thought they would like them, and then when they died, they just were never replaced.
They're kind of cute, which is I think how they got into them, because the couple that owns them, the wife, she loves them.
Yeah.
And you're right. They are kind of terrorists, because there was at one point, I don't know really anything about farming or ranching when I was out there. And so I was kind of left to my own devices for the most part. And there was at one point, one of the goats like kicked me back at the gate. And then they all started scattering around the rest of the farm. And I'm in panic mode, right? I'm like, fuck.
Like they just got out.
Yeah, like there are goats everywhere. And they were separated specifically because like some of them will kind of fight each other. And I didn't know which goat goes into which pen. So I call the owner of the place and I'm like, hey man, issue. I let all the goats out and they are now everywhere. And he's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. He's like, you're going to send me a photo of the goats and I'm going to circle which ones need to go into which pens. And so all of a sudden he's like sending me all these texts with red circles of he's like, this one needs to go in this pen and this one needs to go in this pen. And I'm like trying to wrangle up.
Sounds very straightforward. Probably very different in execution, trying to get them back in the pen.
Trying to grab goats, especially some of them. Oh my God. You're just like, you're tackling them.
Yeah.
Like there's the only way you're getting these goats into these pens.
Best way to deal with any livestock is figure out what treats they like.
Food, yeah.
And then just have it on hand.
I eventually found some animal crackers, which they love.
Of course.
Hilarious.
We don't like our cattle on our farm, they just graze the grass all day. But we have like what they call sweet corn on hand for if we need to move them and they just don't want to move. So if they really like a pasture and they don't want to move, all I have to do is get a bucket of the sweet corn and they come hauling to get it. Like terrifyingly fast hauling
they will plow
to
you
get
over.
it. 100%. Yeah. Especially, the bulls, he's a nice bull, but he's still a bull. He's 2,500 pounds. His name's Pal. And seeing him run is fairly intimidating. So like with him, you let him see it and then you throw it as far away from you as you quickly can. But with animals, it's basically figure out what they like and then use that as the carrot to get them where you need them to be.
Yeah, I eventually learned that one.
Yeah.
Especially the longhorn. Whenever I had pellets, look out.
Yeah.
Because those horns will take your head off.
Yeah, and they're not meaning to, but
No.
they're they turn and all. Like you could sit here
Yeah.
and get clocked by one of their horns if
Yeah.
you're not careful.
So anyways, this isn't a show about farming, but
Yeah.
that is a funny topic that was worth discussing for a little bit. But I do want to get back to kind of like your family orientation and growing up in small town Texas and some of the lessons there. Is that obviously I'm sure a lot of that is carried over to obviously getting into the SEALs and starting your own business. And I'm just curious as to like within the family home, was there, other than your father in the real estate, was there other entrepreneurship in your family?
No, not really. Not that I can think of. My mom was worked in a hospital, and then when she started having kids. So I have an older sister and a younger sister, and then I'm nestled right there in the middle. When she had my older sister, she stepped down from that job and then was at home until we were all school-aged, and then she just taught in basically whatever school we were at, she would just teach at that school, so we could all kind of move around as a family unit. But it was basically just my dad. If you ask me, like, was my dad an entrepreneur when I was a kid? He was, but I don't know that I was
Even aware?
focused or really aware of that. Like, I knew that him and my uncle had businesses together that they ran, and I knew what the businesses were, and we would go and visit them from time to time because a lot of them weren't in Corsicana, but it didn't really strike me that they were, taking a big risk or anything like that. I was just kind of like any kid that has 60 acres, like absorbed in my own personal life out there on the farm, like feeding animals, running amok, disappearing in the woods, all those different types of things. But definitely a constant would just be hard work. Like, he's a super hard worker, and then probably the only person I've ever met that's a harder worker than my dad is my mom. Like, she's just a machine, and she managed most of the farm stuff herself for the majority of my childhood, and never complained. It was just like stuff just got done.
What did you want to be when you were growing up? Like, what was like your initial inspiration?
Yeah, I wanted to be John Wayne when I was a little kid, because that's I didn't know that wasn't really a career path when I was 5 or 6. But when I became a teenager, about 13 years old, I read a book in our Corsicana Public Library about SEALs, which back in the day, that I would have been probably like 1995-ish. There was not that many books out about SEALs. I didn't even know what they were until I stumbled across this book. And then once I read that book, it was game over. Like, that's what I wanted to do. It's the only thing I wanted to do since then. So I was very blessed in that I had a vision of what I wanted to be at a very young age. And I never felt like I floundered or had to kind of figure out what I was supposed to do with my life. I was just like, this is it. Like, this is clearly what I want to do, is this right here.
Why did that speak to you so much? Have you ever reflected on that?
Yeah, I think one, the sense of adventure, just reading those stories about, I get to jump out of airplanes, I get to dive, in my mind, I was like, I'm going to Vietnam, basically. I'm going to run around the jungle and do all this crazy cool stuff. So part of it was probably a sense of adventure. Part of it was probably the challenge of, hey, can I actually make it? Am I capable of doing something like this? And then part of it was the draw of being, quote unquote, elite, like doing something that most people would never even attempt. So that was probably what led me into that, was purely selfishly wanting that style of life, of the adventure and being surrounded by, hard charging guys and, quote unquote, being in a group of elite individuals. But very quickly, when you get into the SEAL teams, you start to realize there's better reasons to be in the SEAL teams.
Totally.
Better reasons than the selfishness of like, hey, I just want to do this. There's looking out for your guys, being part of a team, the mission to accomplish. So, probably some selfish reasons to get into the teams. And then once I got there, the aperture kind of comes off and you're like, oh, this is literally the greatest community I could ever be in. And what are some things that I can do to contribute? Like, what can I do to actually be a contributing member of this organization and not just someone who floats by, basically.
Well, as a young, teenage, impressionable boy, I can imagine it probably sounded like the most badass thing that you probably could have wrapped your head around at that given moment.
It definitely did.
What do you think you would have done had you not been a SEAL? Like, what if you didn't make it?
I literally have no idea, because that was the only thing that I ever thought about.
And I get it, and
Yeah.
I love that it worked out, and
Yeah.
we'll get into that. But that's just like, it's so interesting, right? Is like, because most people don't make it,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, what happens, right? Like, I don't know.
If you join, you're going to the Navy is what's happening. So if you join up and you don't make it through, the selection process is called Basic Underwater Demolition School, or BUDS for short. I mean, BUD/S is the Navy's greatest recruiting tool because hundreds of young men try to go through BUD/S and only about 10 to 15% of them make it through.
Oh, and then the rest just get pushed into the
rest
Navy.
go back to the Navy.
Got it.
So if you didn't make it through, you were going to the Navy, which is very powerful motivation for someone who didn't actually want to be on a ship.
Yeah.
Because you're out there training every day on this beach in Coronado, and then there's a bay, and on the other side of that bay is a bunch of big Navy ships. So the instructors would literally point at those ships and be like, you guys can quit and you'll be on those ships tomorrow. So powerful motivation. But for me, there really wasn't a plan B. I guess I would have just figured it out if and when I came to that bridge, but luckily I didn't have to.
Damn. Okay. Did your family support this decision?
Yes and no. I think they supported it, but I don't know that they actually thought that I was capable of doing something like that.
Really?
Yeah, I was not a very disciplined kid. I was not the hardest worker. Like growing up on a farm, you probably get this impression of a hard worker. I would skate out of work whenever I could possibly skate. I was doing like the bare minimum on this farm, which is why I say my mom was the hardest worker because she would just pick up the slack and just get stuff done where I was dropping the ball. So luckily for me, it's kind of what gave me the discipline and gave me the work ethic because very quickly I realized, at 13, 14 years old, there's no skating by if this is what you want to do. Like you have to be dedicated, you have to have personal discipline, and you have to put in the work that it's going to take to actually be a part of this community. But it was like a night and day difference in my own personality when I had something I was actually focused on. But they supported it to a certain extent. I just don't know that they actually thought it was going to happen.
Do you always been a beef guy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like all through life, it's like beef's on the plate.
Beef's on the plate. Now we didn't have, a ton of like steak and stuff growing up. It was definitely a luxury. It was more, burgers and like sloppy joes and stuff like that was more the meals. And then love you, Mom, but no offense, like you didn't cook very good steaks. Like whenever we had steak, my dad's definitely not a cook. My mom's not the best with steak because it's just not like her go-to food. So I don't ever really remember being super blown away by steak. And we probably weren't getting like the best cuts either. But, you get into the military, you get a little bit of cash in your pocket, and all of a sudden you're eating beef.
I probably had one of the best pieces of beef this past week while I was actually ironically in Denver with Eric Hinman, our mutual friend. And the beef itself was very good, but honestly, what took it over the top was Eric has this like pellet smoker grill type dealio that literally makes a perfect steak every single time.
That's awesome.
It was like butter.
Yeah.
It was I couldn't even tell you where the beef was from, but I just remember that thing made a big difference on how the meat tasted. It
definitely pains me when I see people not cooking steak properly because it doesn't matter how good the cut of beef is. If you're not cooking it properly, you're not getting the most out of that beef. So when someone really knows how to handle a steak, like it's a thing of beauty.
Have you been out there yet to Eric's?
I have not yet. So I'll probably come down here again first when he's splitting time down here. I haven't been to his Denver place yet.
Yeah. Expect a good beef. Definitely bring your beef.
Yeah.
And then put that on his grill, which you probably have something amazing as well that you cook your beef on as well. But
I do cast iron skillet for almost all of my stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Are you a purist?
I'm a purist. So I've got, I've got a giant offset smoker for all things barbecue.
Sure.
And then it has a firebox on one end too, so you can do hardwood and then throw your steaks and stuff on top. I've got the a Rectech, which is a pellet smoker as well. But when it comes to steak, for me it's salt, pepper, put it in a cast iron skillet with some good butter, and you really can't go wrong.
No rosemary.
No, I actually do a little bit of rosemary.
Right.
Most of the time, like my kids don't like rosemary, so my kids are not steak snobs. So if they don't realize how good they have it. If they're eating, I'll typically leave it off of them. But for me, it's salt, pepper, and then most of the time a little bit of rosemary.
Yeah, rosemary butter. That's how I've been doing them. And I've been doing them reverse sear style.
Yeah.
Just because of like the consistency of it. Put it in the oven until it's right temperature and then sear it at the end with some butter and rosemary.
That's amazing.
Has been my go-to.
And it's so easy.
Yeah.
Like if you go out to the grill, and there's definitely, you can cook a good steak in so many different ways. It takes more time. The cast iron skillet heats up in 30 seconds. And then I put the steak on there for maybe a grand total of 5 or 6 minutes, and then I'm done. I let it rest for 5 or 6 minutes, and now we're eating, 10 minutes later, basically, from start to finish, you've got this amazing meal prepped and ready.
Yeah. So I want to circle back a little bit about kind of that upbringing area before we get into the SEAL stuff. What was your favorite job? Like, what were you working at? What were you doing? What was day to life?
I did all kinds of stuff. So I was a ranch hand for a little bit for a neighbor, which was miserable. I worked at a restaurant, and then I was in a record store in our hometown for probably about 3 years, and then I ended up managing that restaurant, record store towards the end. That was probably my favorite job because it's a record store, man. It was super easy. You go in there, you hang out with a buddy that's working there, you listen to whatever music you want to listen to, you sell some music when people come in. It was like the most chill job you could possibly imagine as a teenager. Did not pay well. I was making like $5.25 an hour, but I don't feel like I was working super hard for that $5.25 an hour either.
Were there any like big businesses in that town, or like who was the big companies?
Collins Street Bakery was probably the biggest.
The bakery.
And it's like a worldwide known bakery.
Really?
Around Christmas time, they're like the fruit cake kings of the world.
Really?
So people call in from all over the globe and order fruitcakes from Collins Street Bakery. So it's funny, but I mean, I don't know their exact numbers, but they're doing probably tens of millions of dollars each year in bakery goods. I'm assuming most of which is centered around like the fruitcake type stuff.
Wow.
I would tell people I would be on trips in the military for work now that I work with Echelon Front, and I'll tell people where I'm from, and the only time anybody knows where Corsicana's from is because of Collins Street Bakery.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Other than that, it's all just kind of mom and pop stuff. Used to be a big oil town, and then when the oil boom in Texas kind of dried up in the early 1900s, that went away, and it basically just became mom and pop style businesses.
When we were talking about small town Texas, the two towns that come to mind for anybody listening that I would for sure check out is Lockhart, purely because of barbecue. There is some damn good barbecue in that town. And the other one that I haven't been to yet, but I've heard a number of people talk about it, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, I think it's Marfa.
Marfa, yeah.
It's
way out west, right?
Yeah. Have you
There's
been
not
there?
much there.
No?
I've driven past it once.
Okay.
Yeah, is really not much there.
I don't know why people. That's the second. That's the second one that I've heard a number of people talk about. They're like, you got to go out and check out the shops, or I don't even know what's there, to be honest.
There's like a Louis Vuitton randomly in the middle of that place. I think
Who
it's
is
just
buying Louis Vuitton in Marfa?
I do not know. I think it's literally just a place that a couple of people invested in to make it like this real quirky town in Texas, and that's what it's known for, is just being this little weird little gym out in the middle of literally nowhere in West Texas. But it's a haul to get out there.
So this leads us to the SEAL teams. So you were in the SEALs for how long?
13 and a half years.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah.
13 and a half years. I'm sure you've seen things that I probably don't ever want to see, if I had to guess. In that 13 years, what are maybe some of the memorable moments that you can share, or some of the things that like have taught you the most life lessons, I guess you could say?
Yeah. I mean, probably the biggest life lesson is just your place in the world. You're such a part of a bigger machine, and you're serving such a greater good than you, that it's very hard. I shouldn't say it's very hard. There's plenty of people in the military that are all about themselves, but it's difficult in a community like that to really think of yourself as some giant aggrandizement. Like you very quickly learn kind of your place in the world, and no matter how good you think you are, there's always someone out there that's better than you. And being a part of a community where everybody is just kind of consistently pushing to be the best they can, there's just really not an ability to rest on your laurels. Like you're always trying to become better. And then another thing about the military is every 2 years, at least in the SEAL teams, you're basically moving on to a different job. So, as an officer, I was a squad commander. It means I'm in charge of like 8 people. And then 2 years later, I'm a platoon commander in charge of 21 people. And then a couple years later, I'm a troop commander in charge of 5 SEAL platoons. So every couple of years, you're forced to basically adopt a new role and learn that new role. So there's just no resting. There's just always constant striving for being the best you possibly can and improving your skill set.
What are the best and worst roles as a Navy SEAL?
I mean, the best roles are like a shooter, as we would call, like being an operator. So all the enlisted guys, they get to go do all the things that people think SEALs do. That's like what the enlisted guys do. So sniper school, breacher school, where you learn them how to use explosives to blow different doors up and different charges and stuff. JTAC, which are the guys on the ground that talk to the aircraft overhead and drop bombs and tell them where to pick them up and all that cool stuff. Really learning the art of assaulting different buildings and taking down different targets. That's like the bread and butter, and that's what the enlisted guys do. The officers take part in a lot of those things. We do the exact same training as they do, but our role is not to kick the doors down. Our role is to set up the parameters for the mission and then control the mission, manage the mission. So while they're going to be clearing the next room and actively engaging an enemy, I'm probably going to be coordinating 3 to 5 different things that are happening at that exact same time and making sure that the next phase of the operation is always ready to go. So it's still fun, it's still exciting, but it's 2 different things. So if you talk to most officers in the teams, like, it would have been really cool to just do one deployment as an enlisted guy where all you had to worry about was like kicking doors down. So probably best job just being a brand new guy in the SEAL teams where you're going to get handed a machine gun and you're going to get told, go do good things for your country.
Yeah.
Being an officer is amazing. You get so much more control right off the bat. You have so much more responsibility. But there is always a part of me that was like, man, it would be really nice just one time to be at the front of the train instead of like maybe a little bit more towards the back of the train. A job that people typically didn't want was the communications guy, because every platoon you have to have, so much of the military is depending upon all these operations, your ability to communicate. So guys didn't want to be the radio guy, because if you're the radio guy, you're typically with the officer and not necessarily at the front of the line kicking doors down. But the reality is there's one person that has to go on every single operation, and that's the comms guy. So it's actually a really good thing to be a comms guy, because it's almost like guaranteed that you're going to be on every mission. But it takes guys a little bit of time to figure that out.
Interesting. So it sounds like, again, I don't know anything about this world in general. There was actually, funny enough, there was a small stint where I almost did join the military just to kind of get right in. I think I would have been right into an officer because of the degree I already had.
Yeah.
And I partly wanted to do it just because, like, to help pay for some of the schooling. For whatever reason, it didn't pan out. I'm not super upset about that, honestly. Yeah. I'm very bad at taking orders, I guess, and listening to others.
So are most SEALs.
Okay, so that leads me to my point of where I'm going with this, is that, again, I don't know, but it feels like you almost had a military/Navy experience that was like a subset that, like, does not fit the norm of what I feel like probably most people have from, like, a military quote-unquote experience. Is that accurate?
I was pretty fortunate. As an officer to get to move through, we call it our billets, fairly quickly. So for officers, a lot of times what happens is you'll do an operational tour, what we call, like, basically you're going to deploy, go overseas with your platoon, you're leading a platoon, something like that, and then you'll have to do a couple of what they call disassociated tours in between. So you might go to a staff job for 2 years or 4 years. I was very fortunate that I just went from one operational tour to the next operational tour, little time at a training command, jumped ship from there early, went back to an operational tour, another operational tour. So I was fortunate to just basically get to do what I wanted to do my entire time in the SEAL teams, which was be with the guys and go overseas and hopefully do good things.
Yeah. Before we move to the next part of this conversation, was there anything else that maybe would be worth noteworthy in terms of, like, your experience with the SEALs and how that leads to kind of what you're doing today? Maybe some lessons learned?
I mean, the biggest probably lesson learned that would apply to the business world is just like the never say quit type attitude. You're going to run up into a lot of hurdles, and just your ability to just endure those things and keep going is probably a very underrated skill. Like, you're going to have hardships no matter what industry you're in. There's going to be ups and downs. You're going to make good decisions. You're going to make bad decisions. But just understanding that none of those decisions necessarily have to be catastrophic if you just learn from it and keep going.
Yeah,
it's probably one of the big things. And I think what most people in the military and in special operations in general are very good at is just keeping going. Just head down, truck on, keep going, learn from your mistakes.
A mantra that serves me well is I can't lose if I don't quit.
Yeah.
So now that we're to the beef of the conversation, pun intended, how did you get into Primal Beef? Because, like, clearly there was a transition period between SEALs, leadership coaching with Jocko and the rest of the team, which that's a great book, by the way. Extreme Ownership is the one I've read.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
Very, very fascinating. But now to beef. So like fill us in there. Like how did that happen?
So when we got out, we moved to this town in Virginia where my wife's family has basically all settled. So my wife's one of 8, and over the past probably 10 years now, kind of one by one, her family members have been moving to this town in Virginia. So when we got out, it became the natural place for us to go to give our kids the ability to be around family. So we have 5 kids ourselves. So what we never had in San Diego was we never really had a big familial unit there. So we wanted to give them family. We wanted to give them space. Like what I experienced as a kid, we wanted to give them kind of room to roam around. So bought a farm out in Virginia in this nice small town right in the middle of the Shenandoah Valley. And one of my friends that lives in this town has a beef operation that he's been running for about the last 8 years. So when we moved out there, even though we had our own cattle, I don't raise my cattle for my beef consumption. Basically, I raise them and then I take the calves to the market when they hit about 8 or 9 months old, and I sell the calves at the market to other farmers, and the farmers buy those calves, and then they will typically take them back to their place and finish them, get them big enough to slaughter. For me, it's just I don't have a ton of land to support too many big cows, so it's the cows have the calves, and then after about 8 or 9 months, we take the calves to market, give the land a little bit of ability to kind of recuperate, and then do the whole thing over again each year. So we bought a cow from my partner, Paul, who's now one of the owners at Primal Beef, and it was the best beef I've ever had in my entire life. And that kind of got the wheels turning. And then 5 kids, we go through beef pretty quickly, so we emptied the freezer rather quickly. I ordered another cow from Paul, and it was the exact same experience. I mean, it was, again, the quality was just unreal. So that really got the wheels turning. And I'd been trying to think of something that I could do business-wise that I could start to build out, with my friends, with my family, be something that's more of a legacy type thing. And this started to feel like maybe that could potentially be it. So unbeknownst to Paul at the time, I reached out to Jocko, who's another lover of beef and serial entrepreneur and just all-around great human, and just said, hey, man, what do you think about starting up a farm-raised beef company? And in typical Jocko fashion, his response was like 2 words. He was like, I'm in.
I would have thought it was go.
Go. It's basically, usually it would be go. This one was I'm in. So I talked to Paul and said, hey, what do you think about taking this operation basically nationwide through an e-commerce site? And he was all about it. And then my brother-in-law, we brought him in as well. So the 4 people that are responsible for Primal Beef are Paul, who's the actual guy that knows what he's doing when it comes to beef, Declan, myself, and then Jocko. And we started this about 2 years ago now and went live with it in August of 2023. So the time leading up to August was spent getting the website right, getting the logistics right, getting the customer experience right. And then in August of 2023, everything was ready and we went live and started selling beef in August.
Yeah, I saw it's been, relatively not that long since you guys got up and running.
Yeah.
I feel like what's been a fairly quick turnaround, honestly, what I had to guess.
I think so. It definitely has been. It feels like a slog when you're in it. And, it wasn't anything that any of us could focus on full time because we all had our day jobs that were providing basically the income and the food for our families. So the goal is to make Primal Beef that where we can all step back and just focus on Primal Beef. Not quite there yet, but we're getting there. But it definitely probably felt longer than it actually was. And now that we're selling beef, it's going really well. But the most difficult part is just getting in front of new audiences and letting them understand the difference in the quality of our beef versus what you're going to find on the grocery store shelves, basically.
Yeah, we had a really good conversation about that in terms of, not on this, obviously before, about just like getting the brand right of who you're trying to target. Curious as to maybe some of those earlier stages of starting this beef company. What were maybe some of the hiccups or mistakes or lessons learned early on? Yeah,
probably some of it was thinking that with Jocko's involvement that all of a sudden we were just going to be overwhelmed with business because his audience is so vast and it's so loyal too. Unbelievably loyal because of all the good things that he's doing for people. But it just wasn't the case. So a little bit of expectation management on what growth would look like. we did not budget a lot for marketing to begin with, just because of based off of my connections and just people that I'm fortunate enough to know. We felt like we should run with that as far as we could possibly get before investing a lot of capital into marketing. Because as a startup, everything is basically how much cash do you have on hand, and we bootstrapped this entire thing between the four of us. So now we're investing a little bit more into marketing, but still not a ton of capital is going into marketing. We're just trying to expand our reach through social media connections and through different partnerships and things like that.
Yeah, the branding and marketing, man, I can't even begin to stress how important it is. And like 2 examples just to give you context to this is one of them. Have you ever heard of the company called Olipop?
Yeah, for sure.
The drink, soda, like probiotic soda or whatever it is. I remember hearing their founder story, and the short version is that they were originally given $100,000 in capital, and they put 30,000 of it into the product and 70,000 of it into their branding. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Not to say that you can skim by with having a trash product, but I think there's a lot to be said in that statement of branding's really important.
Very much so.
And the other thing that comes to top of mind too is I think about my buddy who owns a chain at Jimmy John's out in Michigan.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, like the ability to open what is literally just a sandwich shop and to be successful enough that they've been able to open like multiple locations purely comes down to the fact that you can drop a Jimmy John's anywhere and people immediately know what it is and what to expect because of the brand that's behind it.
Yeah.
Which is very different than opening your own mom and pop quote unquote sandwich store that nobody's heard of. It has no reputation. There's no reason for anybody to go there. And it just shows you like branding's really important. Like if not the most important thing. So like in your situation where you're starting out newer-ish in terms of a brand that nobody's heard of and they have no reason to have heard of, it's for sure, it's challenging. Like even if your product is incredible, if nobody knows about it or trusts the brand yet, that's an uphill battle.
Yeah, and I think that's, we probably should have realized that more going into it. Was just not all of a sudden we were going to be inundated with more business than we can handle. And the amount of cattle on our farm, single sourced, all of our beef is raised on one farm, and we're not going to change that. But we can produce a whole lot of beef from that one farm, and we're nowhere near maxing out that capacity just yet. So the pouring a little bit more into the branding and the marketing, what we know for certain is that the beef speaks for itself. We've never had anybody say anything other than just this is outrageously good. So we know the product is good. We know our customer service. The 2 things we really cared about when we started was if the product is good and we take care of our people, we're going to do just fine. How long it takes to get to where we want to be is the scenario, right? Like how do you accelerate that? But everybody that has sampled the beef has loved it. Everybody's reordering that has had it. And then if there's ever an issue with it, which it's a startup, so there's shipping things. So I can't control what FedEx does as much as I would like to control what FedEx does. So if a box gets damaged, if there's ever any concern, it's usually Paul, Declan, that are answering that directly, and then I fill in where I possibly can. So like if something goes wrong, the founder of the company is calling you to make sure that we make things right for you.
Totally.
So we know that those 2 things are what's going to bring us success, and now it's just how do you get it in front of broader audiences, with the understanding of what the brand represents, which is single sourced, farm raised, all American beef that you're just not going to replicate the quality of that in your local butcher store or definitely not at the supermarket, which you have literally no idea where that cow came from or even really what type of cow it is.
Yeah, I like that you use the word accelerate too. I think that for most people, especially listening to the show, there is a degree of we have a tendency to want to accelerate growth, which I think is healthy. But I also think that there is a manageable degree of acceleration because I think oftentimes, although we would love all the new customers or clients, whatever the case might be, you also have to reflect back on like, well, do we even have the operations to handle such a thing?
Yeah.
Right? It's like if you were to all of a sudden get an influx of hundreds of thousands of orders for Primal beef, that might be the reverse problem. Right?
Yeah.
Now it's like, how do we do
How do you
that?
fulfill it?
Yeah.
It would be a great problem to have.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that we did that was actually really smart was we set it up for the long run. So at first we thought about, do we do fulfillment ourselves just to start with so that we can learn the pain points and make sure that all of the customer service stuff is taken care of by us. And we went away from that. And the process now is we control basically the entire process, but we're pretty hands off with most of it. The cattle can't be hands off with the cattle, but we send it down for processing with a partner facility down in Lynchburg called Seven Hills Abattoir. That's kind of like an artisan butcher shop, and they do all of the processing for us, hand cut down there. They do all of the the dry aging, all of that stuff happens there. All the packaging happens down there, and then we flash freeze the beef, which is very important for the quality of the beef, is to make sure that it gets frozen very quickly and not slowly over time. And then we ship it from there to a fulfillment facility in Kansas City. And the reason we did that is the more we thought about it, we're like, we're just never going to be great at fulfillment. And at some point in time, the company's going to grow to a point to where we shouldn't be doing the fulfillment anyway. So let's just, from the very beginning, give that part to the experts and make it the customer experience the best it can possibly be. So we're set up now to where if we did have 100,000 orders, it really wouldn't be that big of a deal. There might be a little bit of a delay as we send the initial batch of cattle down to fulfill, but Seven Hills can handle that, and then the fulfillment center can definitely handle that. So we set things up for the future, and now the real challenge is the mechanism is in place. Let's test it. Let's get the brand to a point to where people understand the value that's there, and now we are really maximizing as much as we possibly can how much beef we can produce.
Who knew you were such a smart businessman, Sean?
Yeah, not me, for sure.
Wow. All the operations in place. We just need to pump some orders through. I love that.
Yeah.
Quickly on the aspect of fruit finished.
Yeah.
What in the hell are we talking about?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways that people finish cattle. So when you're raising cattle, there's kind of three methods. So one, if you think of grass-fed, grass-finished, that means that their entire life, all they're eating is grass, which is great. But it takes more time for a cow to come to the weight that you want it to come to process. It also has a different flavor profile if they're just eating grass, which some people really like. Some people don't really like that much. It's going to be leaner. Nutritionally, there's really not, and this used to be a bigger thing, was there was less understanding of how nutritionally different grass-fed, grass-finished, and then grass-fed, blanket term would be grass-fed, grain-finished. What the nutritional difference was in there. Now what they found is there's really not a whole lot. There's very minimal nutritional difference. The big thing comes from the fact that they're eating grass the majority of their life. If you finish a cow on grain or like what we do, fruit, they're only eating that for a couple of months. So they're getting all the nutrition basically from the grass that they're raised on. So for us, I like the flavor of a grain finished beef, if you will. So one of the things that is unique about us is all of our cattle are finished on grass-fed throughout their entire life. They always have access to grass, but then we supplement that with fruit and really produce that we upcycle from different markets around us. So after a certain amount of time, the markets just can't keep stuff on the shelf for whatever reason. So, produce can't sit on a grocery store shelf forever. So we've worked some partnerships where they'll do deliveries out to the ranch, and then we basically make a big mash out of all the produce that's dropped off, and we supplement with that. And the cows love it. It's easy for them to digest, and it gives a really, really unique flavor profile to the beef that I think is really the secret to why our beef is just so stinking good, is that fruit and grain, or the fruit and produce finish.
Yeah, when Eric first gave me some of the Primal beef, he mentioned that to me. And I remember, he saw my eyebrows raised. I was like, what did you just say? That's a thing that people do with cattle?
Yeah.
And, you're right. It's phenomenal. It is incredible beef.
Man. Yeah, it's awesome going out there, and you see, they have access to pasture. They're eating grass, and then you'll watch a cow, and he's munching on a pineapple, which is hilarious. But, it really does make a huge difference in the flavor and the quality of the beef.
Something I wanted to make sure to touch on as well So a question I always ask people is like, if you were to give a master class on something, for you, I'd have to guess it's leadership.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say probably so.
Especially with your work with the SEALs and Jocko and the consulting and the stuff that you guys do with that. So question then, if you were to wrap up leadership into a tight little bow and you were trying to teach it to, we'll say, a college 101 class of somebody that knows nothing about leadership,
Yeah.
what would you tell them?
2 words. One is influence. All leadership really is influence. It's your ability to influence a group of people and get them moving in a certain direction. We could spend literally a day talking about what's involved in influence, but leadership, all it really is influence. That's a good thing, because what that means is I don't actually have to be in a leadership position to be a leader. There's plenty of people that don't have a title that have way more influence with their peers than their boss has, because they're selfless. They care about relationships. They value individuals, all these different things. So if you were to boil it down, I would say leadership is really about your ability to influence people. The other thing that I would say is leadership is never about you. It should never be about you. It's always about the goal of leadership is surrounding, typically, like you use it from my perspective in the military, it's a mission. We always have a mission that we're out to accomplish. And the mission is never me. It's never about what I want. It's about what our country needed of us. So my ability as a leader to influence our team, to get them behind the mission, and then to take care of your people, because at the end of the day, there's a mistake that I think a lot of leaders make that's like leaders are the ones that get stuff done. No, you're not. You're absolutely not. Your people are the ones that get stuff done. Your job as a leader is to set all the conditions that are necessary for your team to be successful, and then just get the hell out of the way and let them do what they know how to do and be successful. And I think leadership goes off the rails when people lose sight of what it's really about and they put the focus on themselves. And if leadership becomes about you and your ego's involved, then there's just going to be consistent chain of mistakes that keep happening because it's about you and it's not about the mission. And the really unfortunate thing is the people that are left to deal with all those mistakes are the people that you're in charge of, the people that you're leading. So boiling it down to 2 things, I would say influence, and then just the understanding that it's literally never about you.
Yeah.
It's never about you.
I think the interesting parallel there too, which is a conversation we briefly actually had on our call about understanding from a business standpoint of the people who actually have influence versus actually just have like a following base.
Yeah.
Because that is, again, a very different form of like influence or leadership, is like having a bunch of numbers next to your name because you have a big following actually doesn't equate to necessarily influence.
No.
More often than not, what I've found is that people that have the greatest influence actually very often have the smallest following, but they're loyal and they love them and they trust them.
I wish we would have learned that lesson a little bit earlier on, because some of the ambassadors that we wanted to partner with, and again, I know most of them just because of the very unique life that I've been fortunate enough to lead, have 1 million followers, 500,000 followers. And we thought that they would be able to move the needle a lot and get a lot of customers pointed towards us. And it just really wasn't necessarily the case for a lot of the people that had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers. Our best ambassador so far has been a woman named Victoria who runs an Instagram page called Frontier Bound. And she's got a good following. You know, it's 125,000, I think. But she has been able to move way more beef than anybody else has, because people that are her followers actually care about what she has to say.
Totally.
There's a connection there.
Yeah. I found that even honestly from guests of this show. It's funny, is like you could bring on a guest that have a lot of followers, but more often than not, the shows that actually get more downloads and get more views are actually often the smaller people you would never even heard of, but they just have so many people connected to them in their network that love and trust them, and it's like, wow, that did really well. So
yeah,
it shocked me many times as well.
I think it's all about, and it's another aspect of leadership that, again, I only have so much time, so I can't get into like everything, but when you talk about influence, like relationships is the key to influence. And what I would tell every single person that I had the opportunity to lead in the military and out of the military is relationships equal mission success. Your ability to build relationships is going to be the single most determining factor with if you're going to be successful in whatever realm you're possibly in. And it probably blow people's mind that in the military relationships was so important, because people typically think, because of Hollywood and movies, that like I have a rank on my shoulder and I tell people what to do and they do it because I have a rank on my shoulder. Not the case whatsoever. Like, you might be able to get away with that once or twice, but especially in the SEAL teams, people are just going to stop listening to you if you don't have a connection with them, if you don't have a relationship with them. So the ability to build a relationship with, for the people that are running these different pages, their followers basically is, I think, the key to success. And for us, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build a relationship with our customers where they understand that anytime they place an order with us, everything that we do as a company, as individuals, is going towards giving them the best possible experience they can possibly have. The best possible beef, the best possible customer experience, doing good on the backside through the support with the C4 Foundation. And that's really what we're trying to hinge success on, is just our ability to build quality relationships with people who are looking for good, natural farm-raised beef.
I think you just gave me the title of this episode. Relationships equal mission success.
Facts.
That's clever. I like that. I have a round of rapid-fire questions.
Send it.
It's whatever the first thing is that comes to mind. Number 1, what's your best business advice?
Relationships.
Knew it. What's your best marketing advice?
It would probably be that again. It would be relationships. Just what we talked about. I was blown away that I thought that the number of followers would equate orders. It's just not the case.
No.
It's who you're looking to partner with in your marketing. Can they actually build a connection with the people that are following them? Do they actually value what they have to say? Are they following them because they look good with their shirt off and they have lots of muscles and they work out all day long? Or are they following them because they genuinely value their perception on things? So I would say, again, it's relationships in marketing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man, honestly. What's your favorite part about entrepreneurship?
Every day is different, which is also my least favorite part about entrepreneurship.
When are you the most productive?
In the morning, hands down.
Who is your inspiration?
Oh, probably my wife.
Ooh, love that. Great
Probably
answer.
my wife. She is my mom and her are tied for hardest worker ever. Like, being a wife in the SEAL teams is you don't get a lot of credit for it. Matter of fact, you get zero credit for it. There's no glory that comes with it. No one's writing books about it, so people don't understand all the sacrifice that's there. But she raised 5 strong kids while I was out gallivanting across the globe with my buddies, having a great time. And all the burdens of home, she never once laid that on my plate when I was overseas. She just took all that stuff on board, and love of my life, and just, my biggest cheerleader, just constantly supporting me. So,
dude, you're a lucky man. I heard you want 8. Is that what I heard?
I'm still young. There's time. We can make it happen.
Damn, that's impressive.
Yeah, there's plenty of work to do on the farm. So,
tell me one secret or something most people don't know about you.
Oh, geez. Probably that I'm a closet nerd would be the biggest secret.
What
all the things that you don't necessarily think of probably like guys in the teams. So like
Pokemon.
Not Pokemon, thank goodness. I missed that wave.
Yeah,
I was a little too old. But like Lord of the Rings, grew up reading those books, love those things. Got a little nerdy streak in me that most people probably don't know about, unless you really know me well.
I love that. What would you change about yourself?
I think I'm a pretty patient person, but being more patient. And most of that comes in the home life. I'm a master at detaching because of all the training we've been through. It just kind of inoculates you to stress. So nothing really phases you. But at home, you're more emotionally involved at home than you are anywhere else. And it's still hard for me to detach as much as I wish I could at home. So a little bit more patience.
What's your favorite app or resource you're using right now?
Ooh, I don't use a ton of apps. Todoist is a good one. I'm a big fan of a checklist. So I think it's really important at nighttime, before you go to bed, make your checklist of what needs to get done the next day. When you wake up, again, for me, I'm most productive in the morning. Have some quiet time, start the day off slow, and then look at that list of what needs to get done, and then just start going to work on that list. And Todoist allows me to just real quick itemize things and then click a button and get it off my to-do list. So I really like that app.
What keeps you motivated?
What keeps me motivated? Family. Just, wanting to be the best dad I can be, want to be the best husband I can be, want to be the best person I can be.
This will be a tough one for you, I guess. This might be the first person that might be a tough one. What's your favorite part about Austin? And you can't say the people.
I miss how open everything is. And I mean like the sky. Like you look around, where I live now, it's beautiful. It's in the middle of the Blue Ridge Mountains. So I've got like mountains on the left, mountains on the right. The Shenandoah River runs right through the middle. It's absolute paradise. But I told my wife when we first moved there, I legit felt like claustrophobic because you're seeing lots of green and not lots of blue, which was very different for me. Where I grew up in Texas, we had literally the high ground in our county. We were on like the highest portion of our county where our farm was. So you could see everything. I could see the Ferris wheel at nighttime in Dallas, the giant Texas Ferris wheel at nighttime with a set of binoculars because we live 60 miles away, but there's nothing in between us and it. So I love the sky. I love the openness of Texas. So coming back here, I always feel a little bit of like relief because I can see everything, which I love.
I've seen some cloud structures in Texas that I've never seen in my entire life growing up in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Because Minnesota is very trees, hilly, wavy, so you don't see very far distances.
No.
Here, though, I can't tell you the number of times I've seen like the edge of a storm line with the cloud line, and I'm like, what am I fucking looking at?
Absolutely.
Like
and you get to watch it roll in.
Yes.
We used to sit on our porch at our ranch growing up, and there's big thunderstorms in Texas all the time. But like you said, you would watch it roll in from miles and miles away, lightning flashing all over the place. And then finally when it got to you, it was batting down the hatches and get inside. But you could sit out there for an hour watching it come your way.
Reminds me of the movie Twister. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, it was terrifying as a kid when it came out because I was like, we had a tornado come through our property basically and like tear the roof off of our barn. Luckily, it didn't really damage the house that much. But Twister's a very different experience for people that probably live in the tornado zone than people that live in, like San Diego or something.
I just saw they're doing a remake of it. I swear all they do is remake movies now.
I don't know how you could remake Twister.
They try to do it with every movie, and I don't know how either. But although I heard the new Lion King's pretty sweet. Either way. I have one last question. Before I ask that question, though, I want to acknowledge you, man. For raising 5 children, for making your way down here to Austin, Texas to spend some time with me, for serving in the military and protecting us peasants in America who've never even probably held a gun, most of us. And honestly, man, for just like being a super genuine guy. Like I really think you're doing really good things with this beef company, and I'm looking forward to it.
I appreciate that, man.
Yeah.
The SEAL teams gave me literally everything that I have. Literally everything. All my good traits, most of my good traits, I think, come from there. I met my wife through the SEAL teams. I met my friends through the SEAL teams. The business wouldn't have started if it wasn't for the SEAL teams. And I just feel genuinely honored to be a part of that community. So it's an honor to serve, but I really appreciate that.
Yeah, man. Honestly, I mean it. My last question is, or before I ask it, what's your plug? Where can people find you? Where's Primal Beef?
Primalbeef.com is the website, which, by the way, we're migrating to a new website because probably the biggest lesson learned was we went with like a WooCommerce-based website, and it just did not give us the functionality that we wanted and didn't give us the customer experience that we wanted. So we're migrating to Shopify, again, all with the intent of giving the customer the ability to put what they want in the box versus kind of what we want to go in the box. So primalbeef.com, new websites. It's going to be the same thing, but it's getting formed right now. And then at primal_beef_co is the Instagram site. So I think that's kind of the only 2 places to find us right now.
And I know I've seen you pop up on that Instagram page a few times, which I appreciate.
A couple times.
Yeah,
I try to do a little bit of like public service announcements and like some beef type stuff, but mostly it's just pictures of delicious beef.
You keep repping that social media game. I love it. Last question. It's whatever your best piece of advice is to you or anybody else in a similar circumstance of like early on in their business, right? You've obviously been newerish, I guess you could say, within the past year here of starting this beef company. And I'm sure there's a lot of lessons and things you wish you would have known from ground zero. And so it's really, what's your best piece of advice to your younger self or somebody else that's in that early stage?
I would say it's kind of twofold. And it was very similar to life in the military, which is know what your mission is, know what value you're trying to provide, and then keep it simple. The more simple that it is, the higher your chance of success is going to be. Anytime you start to add complexity or you try to deviate from what your mission is, odds are that it's not going to go the way that you think it was going to go. My last tour in the SEAL teams, I was the officer in charge of all wartime training for the West Coast SEAL team. So it was my job to prepare every single SEAL on the West Coast, which is like 1,200 SEALs, for war. And I would get platoons. They would come through training, and I'd put them through 6 months of focused training. The number one mistake that I would see platoons make is they would try to they would not keep things simple. They would try to make things too complex, and nothing survives first contact with the enemy. And with business, there's things that are going to go wrong. And the more simple your business model is to begin with, the more likelihood that you're going to be able to weather those storms when they come. So for us, what we wanted to start with was put the best beef we possibly can in the box and give it to our customers. Don't have a lot of optionality. Just make 7 or 8 different boxes and send it. And keep all the focus on just the customer experience and the beef. Now we're to a point to where we know that we can do that well. Now we're expanding and making things a little bit more complex, but not that much more complex. Give people the ability to add a la carte items, to build their own box, add beef jerky and beef sticks as an option, maybe some swag. But to begin with, the sole focus was best beef you can in a box, best customer service. If we just did those 2 things, we were very confident we were going to be successful. Keep it simple.
I literally, wow, you have obviously gained a lot of value out of being a SEAL. Like, I honestly can't think of better advice that you could give somebody early in their stages of the business. That is beautiful. Thank you. Appreciate you being on the show, Sean.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Hey friend, thanks for listening to the show, and if you have any feedback for me about the show or any other guests that you'd want to see in the show, definitely shoot me a message. I love engaging with my audience and figuring out how I can provide the best value possible to the people listening to this show. Before you go, I only have one ask of you, and that would be to check out my 3 Tips Tuesday newsletter. It's 3 marketing tips every Tuesday specifically for the health and fitness entrepreneur to help them attract new leads. If you press the link in the description, it'll take you directly to the archive of all my previous newsletters, and you can decide for yourself if it's something for you. If you end up finding it helpful, you can just sign up for the newsletter and you'll get it in your inbox every Tuesday. Thanks again, and keep hustling, my friends.